But who better than me?
Welcome back to the channel. If you made it this far, thank you very much. So now we are going to go to the fight of the year for 2022. Now this is the first category that is mixed with both the male and the female competitors. So yeah, this one isn't separated. It's what was the greatest at the time. So let's see what the list itself holds. Without further ado, let's get into it. So my number 5 fight of the year 2022 goes to Chris Smith versus Isaac Chamberlain. That happened down in Bournemouth. I believe it was June or July earlier on this year. Most people who watched this fight was thoroughly entertained from start to finish. It was one of those fights where you thought the writing was on the wall on several different occasions, with Chris Smith maybe trapping Isaac Chamberlain on the ropes and sort of having his way, and then all of a sudden Isaac would come back with a slick counter or like a swift punch that Chris didn't quite see, and would change the tide of how the fight itself was going. And Isaac decided to fight this fight Chris Smith's way. So rather than using his boxing skills to offset Chris, he decided just to meet him toe to toe, try to use his size and fight fire with fire that way. Now, being the fact that he's a much smaller guy just physically than Chris, that was a ballsy tactic, but Isaac done it. Both guys saw the 12th round, and even though Isaac Chamberlain suffered a broken orbital bone, it was just a great fight to watch. Like, if you haven't seen it, I would definitely suggest going to watch that. I don't think there's a lot of people in the UK that would disagree with me on that one. If you haven't seen it in the US, then definitely I'll go, search through Twitter and search through YouTube and just have a look at that. Chris Smith versus Isaac Chamberlain. But yeah, that's my number 5 fight of the year for 2022. Right, my number 4 fight of the year for 2022 goes to Claressa Shields versus Savannah Marshall. Now, I was in attendance for this, which always makes things a little bit better, a little more heightened, but everything about this fight crescendoed to the perfect possible moment. Now, the only way it would have been any better is if it had taken place the month before, like it was supposed to, rather than, happen in October. Should have happened in September, where everything was at a fever pitch. But again, it was a fight whereby both women had equal and legitimate claims to say that they won, although one was a lot more of a legitimate claim than the other by the public's demand. And again, no arguments to that, but Claressa said herself this was the hardest fight she had. Savannah hits the hardest she's ever been hit, and it was one of those fights where Claressa did a lot more of the work, like the best work within the rounds, and was a lot more active for the majority of the time. But every time that Savannah landed, you could see that there was an effect, and it was all about whether Claressa had the dog to get past that and stick on her chest and sort of break Savannah's heart and wear her down. And that was how the fight was supposed to play out. And ultimately it just became one of those attritional fights where there was skill in the pocket for I guess a good 80% of the entire fight, as long as it lasted. Claressa was a deserved winner at the end of it. I've watched it several different times, and again, no issues with that. It's always enjoyable, and every time I've watched it back, as opposed to watching the footage that I took almost from ringside, I can see there's certain little nuances that I never noticed the first time and the second time. It's one of those fights that kind of does get a little bit better each and every time you watch it. So for that reason, yeah, my number 4 fight is Claressa Shields versus Savannah Marshall. So my number 3 fight of the year for 2022 goes to Katie Taylor versus Amanda Serrano at Madison Square Garden. Now, I've stated previously and in other videos that this fight was the reason that women's boxing was able to hit some of the heights that it has hit this year. I don't believe that there's a lot of events that happened afterwards that would have happened if it wasn't for the success of this fight, and the fact of these being the first 2 women to sell out the Garden as the main event is a very significant achievement. Not to mention the fight itself was an amazing fight, which had a little bit of everything. It had masterful boxing from Katie Taylor in the first couple of rounds, but it had some nice stalking and body work from Amanda Serrano, you know, sort of rounds 3, 4, 5, to the point where Katie Taylor looked like she was about to get stopped on her feet, possibly even, you know, jumped in by the referee in round 5, but just due to her own grit, determination, she carried on swinging back, was able to smother and hold Amanda Serrano at times to get her composure. It was one of those, she came through one of the biggest crises of her career, just due to the experience that she had and the willpower and the knowledge of how to survive these tough rounds. She managed to get through it, compose herself in the 6th, and then again just start dominating and taking over again when Amanda had no answers. 7, 8, 9 and 10 to win. You know, it was, to me, it didn't even have to be a split decision, but Amanda obviously being naturally from New York, but Katie living in New York, the atmosphere and the arena was epic as well. You know, Puerto Ricans on one side, Irish on the other. You heard the noise, and you heard every moment of that fight was cheered for, and it just made it a great experience. And it's a shame it's one of those ones I couldn't have actually been at. I would have loved to have been in the atmosphere and in the arena for that one. But yeah, that's my number 3 fight of the year for 2022. My number 2 fight of the year for 2022 goes to Leigh Wood versus Michael Conlan. Now, this is most people's number 1 fight, and again, this is one of those times where if you wanted to say this is the number 1, I'm not gonna argue with you. My number 1, you'll see, hopefully you'll see where I'm coming from when I do display it. But this one, pretty much, if you had a Hollywood script movie, it wouldn't have been written better than this. This is literally the stuff that you see on film when you think, oh, that will never happen in real life. You've got the regular champ Leigh Wood, who most people actually had as the underdog in the fight, I do believe. You know, boxing feel out round in the first round, all of a sudden at the very end of the first round gets knocked down. And I remember I was in the arena and I was pissed because I was filming the round, and I thought, oh, okay, nothing's really going on. As soon as I pressed stop on my camera, boom, that punch landed and the knockdown happened. I was looking at my brethren was looking at me. I'm like, I was pissed because I didn't record it. It was, yeah, but then the fight, you know, you've got Leigh Wood just getting pieced up for the whole first half of the fight, but his Will's just keeping him in there, and then he starts to come back a little bit towards the end, but he's still losing on the cards. Then all of a sudden he gets a knockdown awarded to him on Michael Conlan in the 11th, making you know, where everyone complained that it was a slip, it wasn't an actual knockdown, but then that made the cards closer, a lot closer than maybe they would have been previously. Then, you know, 12th round, amazing. Michael Conlan is on the ropes, as he's been a few times in the fight, just slipping and riding shots. All of a sudden he ends up dipping into a short right, which basically has him folded over, you know, ready to roll out of the ring, and Leigh Wood just helps him out with a little bit of a salvo of punches. Him sliding out the ring head first. Don't know if he hit his head on the ground. We've never seen a replay to be able to tell how he actually landed, but it was a vicious, it was a brutal knockout. It was a fight that the crowd loved. You had half of the crowd were, you know, Mick Conlan fans, half of the crowd were Leigh Wood fans. It was the Irish versus the Nottingham heads, and it was a crescendo. It was amazing atmosphere in that arena for that fight, and that's one that I'll never forget. And I've still got some of the footage that I can look back on, even the knockout footage. I have that. I just don't have the first knockdown, which still to this day pisses me off. But that is my number 2 fight of the year for 2022. But we're here now. This is going to be very controversial, and I think a lot of people are going to dismiss this one out of hand straight away until they go back and actually remember that fight, because a lot of time you don't remember the fights that are on undercards. But to me, my number 1 fight of the year for 2022 goes to Alan Babbage versus Adam Bulski. which was on the undercard of Craig Richards and Joshua Buatsi. Now, look, the reason this is my number one, first of all, again, if you want a fight that's just total carnage, just all out action, you know, that'll kind of keep you on the edge of your seats, this is it. I was in the arena, and you know, you've got everything from Alan Babbage being the, you know, the tacked on, the nailed on favorite. He's coming, what was it? It was like 10 fights, 10 knockouts. He was just expected to run through this guy, ends up getting put down in the first 30 seconds of round one. And, you know, Adam Bolski is just, you know, he's boxing and moving. He's, you know, he's touching up Babbage, you know, with the jab. He's just got him kind of where he wants him for, you know, the first round, 2 rounds. Maybe even to the third, but then he's covering up. He's having to go on the ropes to take his breathers. Alan Babbage is just pounding forward. He's just stepping forward. He's swinging wild hooks. They're both trying to trade and catch each other with counter left hooks quite a bit, and counter right hooks as well. It's just one of those all-out fights, which then gets a little bit more technical in the middle parts of the fight. But you just see Bolski on the ropes now, just getting pounded on, but somehow just surviving the onslaught. His face doesn't necessarily look like he was winning this fight at any point, but he was more than a live dog in it. To then having the controversy of Alan Babbage getting 2-pieced up at the end of the 9th round after the bell, to the point of Adam Bolski getting a point taken off at the start of the 10th, and Babbage is out on his feet, can barely stand up, can barely keep his composure. But in the 10th round, Bolski smells blood, and he's just going after Babbage. He's popping the jab, he's looking for that right hand, but Babbage he's still coherent enough to slip and slide until he's able to fully get his legs underneath him. It was just an amazing fight to watch. It ended up with no knockouts, surprisingly, but it was just one of those fights. It was just total and utter carnage from the start to the finish. And another reason why it actually made my number one, it's a bit more personal to me, so I don't expect any of you guys to agree with this. But again, as I said, I was in the arena, and subsequently I was on a date, significant other at the time, and she'd never really been into boxing, never watched any boxing, you know, seen maybe a couple matches here or there, had no interest in it whatsoever. She watched that fight and instantly then became a fan of boxing, and since then has even sent me stuff. She's sent me YouTube clips, she's sent me like screenshots, like who's this person, who's that person, or when can we go to, like, you know when's the next event that we can go to. And subsequently we've been to a couple since then, and that fight was what got her into boxing. So for that slightly sentimental and personal reason, that is why that is my fight of the year for 2022, which is Alan Babbage versus Adam Bolski. Now again, leave yours down below. I'm pretty sure what 99% of you are gonna say it's fine, but yeah, if there's any other fights that maybe should have been in this list that you think should have deserved the number 1 or 2, 3, 4 or 5, feel free to let me know. I'd love to see, I'd love to read it, and I'll interact with everyone. But for now, that's the end of the list, so thank you very much for watching, and yeah, see you on the next one.